Welcome to this Infosecurity Europe podcast.
My name's Steve Wright. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Privacy Culture. So from that title, you can probably guess we are dedicated towards developing ways of helping an organization really embed privacy into their DNA, into their organization. So just thinking about what the threat landscape is this coming year, 2022. I mean, it's interesting because according to Cybersecurity Ventures report, cybercrime will cost the world about 10.5 trillion by 2025. That's up from 3 trillion in 2015. So that represents a massive transfer of economic wealth, and cybercrime is a big global issue. And I think there's a lot more we can still be doing in this space, but there are several kind of things that keep me awake at night, and certainly my clients that I work with at the moment. One is the app-based threats, so kind of malicious applications. Web-based threats, which is still there, still prevails, typically done through the form of phishing, and that's still most of my clients still suffer from phishing attacks. And then the more traditional network threats, and then of course some of those physical threats where we're not using two-factor authentication or sort of biometric or PIN or identification. The other areas that I'm predicting are going to be increasingly tricky. I think social engineering attacks are getting stronger and wider range, and these malicious ways or malicious activities are used to get in there and to trick users. And I think they're becoming smarter, especially as more and more of us are working from home. The level of social engineering now is so clever and really difficult to spot, and is similar with the phishing attacks, etc. Very, very hard. And with us working from home due to the pandemic, that's caused, I think, increased vulnerability, because we're working in isolation a lot more. I know we're slowly going back to normal, or the new normal, but we're working in isolation, and we can, we've got more time in front of the screen, so we could be clicking places that we shouldn't click, or following links, clicking on links. And I think it's really, really hard, and we'll come on to the human aspect in a moment. The other big area for me, Ness, is around artificial intelligence. And I know that Eric Schmidt, who we all know, has launched a new $125 million fund for AI research to solve some of the hard problems, which I think is fascinating. The Financial Conduct Authority has warned banks to avoid discrimination re the use of AI, especially around loan applications. And there are real risks from harm because of bias, because of misuse, and some of the sort of social impacts of those have quite toxic consequences. And I think the challenge here is AI, is incredibly powerful, and it's got lots of good in it, but it can also undermine trust, and that's a big problem, because for us in cybersecurity industry, we have been fighting quietly in the background to try to protect and maintain that trust. And I think we're in danger of AI undoing some of the good work we're doing, which is really tricky. And then the only other sort of observation, and we come on to this, is China is now on track to surpass the US as an AI superpower, which is worrying. But that's kind of what I'm seeing, if you like, on my horizon. And these are certainly the things that I think are going to cause us more and more problems. Monetization of threats. I mean, there's three kind of broad areas here where the bad actors are using mobile security threats, and which I've just spoke about. This, that encompasses a whole variety of threats on mobile, such as the malicious apps, etc. And I think more ways to bypass the two-factor or one-factor authentication. I think we're in danger there of over-reliance on, say, for example, your mobile devices for it, because it uses AI and biometric data to do facial recognition and things like that. And I think, I think the monetization of that, there's a lot of incentive, that's the truth, for these bad actors to actually invest and try and hack that kind of biometric authentication method, which is worrying. The cloud security threats, because obviously we've got more potential for the leakage of high value data, and that's data that's traveling between organization to organization, and that, we're seeing more of that, if you like, that commercial reality of basically bots for hire in the dark web and other such things, where you can launch attack on a cloud-based provider, and I think that much more sort of commercialization of that criminal activity is happening in the underground. And one of the key tools which the company that I used to work for suffered from that, so that was John Lewis. But more recently, one of my clients had a ransomware attack. And this does come in all shapes and sizes. But what I've seen in this particular scenario is they did a data exfiltration. And the problem with that, be it that it was ransomware, is, the investigating team don't really know what's been compromised. They can't tell what's been taken and what's not been taken, or what's moved or what's been copied. And that's a real worry, because how, from a, if I've got my privacy hat on here from a DPO perspective, if that type of ransomware is happening, how do I know what the harm is to the individual? Because I can go to worst case scenario, but very often, as we found at John Lewis, the ransomware attack was had been gathered through screen scrapes of data that was readily available, and they were it was a fraud. They were just trying it on with us, but we didn't know that, and we had to test the data, and we asked for sets of the data before we confirmed what we were going to do about it. So it was very bizarre dealing with these bad actors and these gangs, effectively, to ask them for more sample data so we could test it to see whether they had actually infiltrated as they said they had. And we worked quite closely with the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK, which is a real blessing, and we were able to ascertain that in that case it was synthetic data. They've made it up. So those, for me, is like hiring that capability, hiring those robots, that commercialization of that dark web, of that underground activities. I think if we could properly measure it, we would see super growth, especially during the pandemic. And the problem with that is, now they've had the taste, they can see the commercial reality of this. There's going to be no abating. So this is just going to get a lot worse, I'm afraid. The question about the nation state or the rogue state is quite fraught with problems. Not because I work for a big organization that I wouldn't, that I'm gagged, but because I feel this is something which is on a geopolitical spectrum, as well as a global economic spectrum. What's worrying about that is, how they're using their technology, their hacking technology, to take down sites, but then replace it with propaganda. And that's really just disconcerting because, you know, I know we had all the scandals with Facebook a few years ago with the election rigging in the US, but and here in the UK, allegations, and I don't think anything's been proven yet. But the point is that if that's being sponsored to meddle and to play with people's minds and to you know to put us in a precarious position, or to put a particular state to feel intimidated by a bigger state, or certainly a state with more resources and capability and capacity, then that's a worrying trend. That's a lot of this, if you like, warfare has moved into the cyber warfare technique, and yeah, so that it does worry me. It does, really does. So on cryptocurrencies, I mean, you know, it's been one of those things, isn't it? That has, you've heard amazing stories about people who have made super amounts of money, none of which I can confirm or deny. I just don't know. But I think we are definitely here in an era where cryptocurrency is going to stay, and because there is room for it, and therefore and the markets are determined that. If you look at Bitcoin, etc., I think it's £700 share price or something, you know, or it's got a market cap of, you know, 400 million or something ridiculous, billion, sorry. And you know, it beggars belief. But I think the problem I have with it from a cybersecurity kind of and kind of privacy perspective is the storage makes them prone to human error, and that would be the same. You know, so in other words, they're prone to hacks, they're prone to security breaches. These new technologies, which are useful and seemingly impregnable, are still vulnerable, because the one thing that drives all of this is people. And you know, and we're just prone to making mistakes, and errors happen, right? I think also there's a good couple of points about you know, is the legal consideration to cryptocurrency, certainly from governments, because you know, how does, you know, the governments obviously, you know, tax organizations, and therefore how they view cryptocurrency holdings, and how do they then tax against that, whether that's sort of capital gains tax, or what is the mechanism, and where are they domiciled is a big challenge, I think, for global governments, because you know, they rely on those taxes on normal goods, if you like, by charging things, you know, like VAT or transactional taxes and things like that. And so with the cryptocurrencies, where is the tax going? And so there is a sort of slightly ethical debate about whether or not they should be paying tax, and should they be, you know, domiciled and then taxed accordingly. So I do feel there's a lot more to be done in this space. I haven't bought any myself, but I wouldn't rule it out. And I know that certainly in the US, the IRS, which is the same as our HMRC, has said that cryptocurrencies are like property rather than currency, and therefore they're an asset, and then they'll be subject to capital gains tax. So it'd be quite interesting to see if that changes cryptocurrencies and the current exchange and the sort of gold rush that we've got going on at the moment. So more on that. I suppose we just have to watch that space. I think with respect to this aspect of human, you know, in terms of cybersecurity and the future, it's still, for me, the biggest part. We, as an organisation, we help. We're running a phishing campaign for a bank, for example. Now, you could ask, why is that related to privacy? Well, because 70 to 90% of all incidents are people sending the wrong stuff or clicking on the wrong link. And so it's kind of in our interest to promote the educational side of it. And I think that for me, I've always said that it's the human element that is your biggest defense, and if you educate and give people the knowledge, then you can change behaviors and see a real difference in your security defensible position. And we did some work last year. We did a survey, and it's called the Global Privacy Culture Survey 2021. And it was interesting because we looked at a whole spectrum of issues, and we had somewhere around 4,000 respondents to this survey across about 40 countries and about 6 or 7 different industry sectors. And what we can tell you from that was that there are common issues wherever you are in the world, and these are things like security by design, education, data retention and deletion, risk management, and and then sort of security, privacy specific things like records of processing, which is Article 30, and other kind of issues. But what's really, really clear, without a shadow of a doubt, is people want to know this, employees want to know this, but they're not given the opportunity. Now, what's happened and what seems to happen is certainly in the privacy sector, everyone was running for 2018 GDPR go live, and everybody got done to death with PowerPoints and e-learning. And then they've kind of managed to get it into this box ticking exercise where once a year, part of your annual assessment, have you done your security training? Tick, yeah. Have you done your privacy training? Tick, yeah. And we've fallen into this routine instead of thinking about how powerful it is to enable and empower people to actually make good decisions, to make the right decisions. And the key to that is giving them access to the data. And I think it's like 1 in 5 just don't know where to go for the data in most organizations. And that's a really worrying statistic, because we're spending all this money on software and on tools and on monitoring and compliance, yet we spend a fraction, a small percentage on that, on training, on education, on awareness, on communications, on e-learning, and it's just not proportionate. So as you can probably tell, you've touched on a subject that's dear to my heart, because I still can't understand that we're not pouring as much time and effort into our training of our people as we are into software and technical solutions to try and remediate or reduce the misconfigurations or whatever the problem is. So for me, this is the single biggest weakness that we have in terms of training, awareness and communication. We're not doing enough, or worse, it's not good enough. We're not setting the bar, and we're just allowing us to and our employees, our staff, to sort of drift through and just nonchalantly kind of know or sort of understand. And the only other thing I'll say on that is our greatest success when we're helping organizations in this space is around personalizing it. So making it about something about you as an individual. So we're all working from home, a lot more so. So are my settings open? Things like that. Are my Facebook settings open, or whatever social platform you're using? Is my Wi-Fi switched open? So anyone can hear it and see it. So it's all those kind of things that I think you can help your organization by helping your staff to help themselves. And you've got to make sure that's accessible, and you've got to make sure it's sticky and it's interesting and relevant. And above all, and this is really, there's the last point on this, above all, it's got to be relevant to the audience. There is no one size fits all. There's no point training your software developers in legitimate interest or in, I don't know, access management, perhaps. You've got to tell them about what they need to know, because that's the role they do. That's what they deliver. They're developing code. You've got to explain to them about the rules, about the boundaries, perhaps even principles around certain things, or red lines that you won't cross, and those types of things. And I think we're not doing a good enough job on this space. And I think we're going to continue to have problems because we are not investing in that human element. How is this changing the third-party model? I think what companies need to do to protect against these threats, these attacks, if you like, is it's no different from your own estate. That's the first thing. I know the whole objective is to kind of save money, and obviously to promote scalability and accessibility and all of those kind of good things, which very often you can't do that internally. And the cost has become so cheap, so available, that it's very difficult to argue against. But there are some basic rudimentary things, I think, as security and privacy professionals we have to look out for, and things like access management. Still a big problem for many SaaS platforms. Misconfiguration, the wrong setup, especially when you're migrating, and if you get that configuration wrong, you've inadvertently left a backdoor open. So you can pen test, and you can get some external pen testing done to help that, or red team, blue teams, whatever program you run. I think also the challenge with third parties, especially around SaaS, is regulatory compliance, because there's a myriad of regulations. There's 142 countries that now have privacy laws, and a very similar number for security. And so, what you can do with data going in and out of China, for example, is very different to, say, Canada, to France, and you need to, it's a bit of a minefield, so you need to think very carefully and be very clever about that. The actual storage and the retention of that, because the cost of storage has gone down so much, there's a temptation just to keep hold of everything, but that flies in the face of data retention law and data retention schedules, because some laws permit you held on to these things indefinitely, but others are very strict about you must delete it, say 3 years after the person's left, or 7 years for tax records, or and if you're found still retaining that data because it was cheap to put in the cloud with your third party, then that's you could find yourself under the scrutiny of a regulator. So you really don't want that. I think security and privacy breaches, or incidents, I prefer to say. Most of my clients, and in fact most of my roles as a DPO and a CISO over the past dozen years have involved in some way working with a third party when an incident has occurred. And one of the number one problem is trying to get hold of someone, because it always happens on a Friday afternoon. And the other problem is trying to get hold of the contract, because it's in that contract that you should be specifying what you do and what you don't do. And I think that's the real danger, is that in the immediate aftermath of an incident, you're trying to contain the problem and stop it from getting worse, and just trying to limit the amount of damage or harm to individuals. And so you've only got, and you're meant to notify, depending on which country, or in the US, in which state you're in, you've got a platitude of different notifications. Some might be 24 hours, some might be 36, some might be 72. So all of those things make it really complicated to do the right thing at the right time. And bear in mind, you're under pressure. And when you're in that pressurized situation of an incident, managing an incident, the one thing you need is clear leadership and clear procedures. And the only way to resolve that, in my mind, is to know who your third parties are, and to know what the contractual relationship is and what you've agreed or not agreed, and to make sure you've got a backup plan. And so your DR plans and your business continuity plans become incredibly useful in those times of crisis. And the only other thing I'd say on that, Ness, is just around, practice, because this is what the emergency services do so well. The armed forces or the fire brigade, etc. There's no practice, and that makes perfect. Practice makes perfect, and so many companies now, I think, when they've outsourced to third parties, they think, oh, well, that's okay. We don't have to, Aaron. That's their problem now. Well, the truth is, and certainly in the eyes of the law, in data protection, you are still the data controller, and they are third-party data processor. In other words, you're making decisions about how you use the data. Therefore, that's deemed under definition of the law that you are the data controller, and therefore you ultimately have a responsibility, even if you've outsourced it to said companies. So it's about really understanding the entire data life cycle in that process and making sure you know what you're vulnerable against. So those are the things I think from a third party are kind of risk perspective and cybersecurity risk are still real today and will continue to get worse and more complex. And especially if you're a multi-international organization where you're in, umpteen countries and you've got data flying to and fro, and it's not just about the immediate third party, it's the third party's third party that, you didn't realize that somebody else is doing backups for them. And their clouds are based in a jurisdiction or in a country which have, I don't know, laws which allow their enforcement agencies to access that data, and that contravenes obviously GDPR, which is why we have Schrems too, and other implications around safe harbor. That was all on the back of that same premise. So there's a lot to think about, and I'm not sure if that was a short answer, but certainly that for me, from a horizon about what's coming up, those are the things, what we've just touched on, that really keep me awake at night, and certainly are the things that I would be thinking about if I was a CISO or a DPO. I'm looking forward to Infosec this year, as I do every year, and I've been coming for donkeys. It feels like a long time. I feel like I've grown up with Infosec. Infosec's grown up with me. I go there because of innovation. I go there to network. I go there to learn. And that's what it's all about. You've got to be there. You take time out. You listen to the lectures, the keynotes, and you go around the stalls and you talk to some of those vendors. And that's the only real way you'll find out, because there's only a certain amount of research you can do online, but in actual fact, what you need is a human, and you need someone to explain it to you, how it works, what the advantages are, and then you can think about whether that's right for your environment. And that human aspect is really, really important. So I'm really excited about getting back to Infosec this year.
Thank you for listening to this Infosecurity Europe podcast.